From Aotea Great Barrier Island, Aotearoa New Zealand, welcome to Small Island Big Ideas, an ongoing festival of conversations and events created to take Aotea Great Barrier Island and possibly the world forward. I'm Tim Hyam.
And I'm Sandy Burgum, and together with our friend Bree Biederman, we are the Small Island Big Ideas team. It's 2024, and Small Island Big Ideas is going global. Thanks to input from many of those in our own community, we've scoured the globe to find other small islands, similar in size to our own, who've had a big idea that has led to some sort of radical reinvention.
We're interested in how other small islands are facing the future. How have they acted on a big idea that's transformed their island community in a positive way? We'll be sharing those conversations and learnings on this podcast over the next few months, one small island at a time. So let's get started.
Lord Howe Island in the Tasman Sea is a UNESCO World Heritage Site that is focused on conservation and sustainable tourism. Previously, the island faced significant environmental challenges due to invasive species, overfishing, and unsustainable tourism practices. Concerns were growing about the long-term sustainability of the island's unique ecosystem and the impact on its biodiversity, which includes several endemic species. But today it's a different story. Lord Howe Island serves as an exemplary model of ecotourism and has been pest-free since 2019.
Hey Ian, good to see you. You're looking like a real naturalist with your books and your stuffed birds in the background
That could be one of those backgrounds from Zoom.
I know it's the real deal at Lord Howe Island. We don't do fake news. This is it's the Lord Howe Island Museum Library, and we all have lovely Huon pine furniture and book cabinets. And behind me is the biggest collection of Lord Howe Island books and maps in the world. We have documents here that no other library, whether it be London, New York, Sydney, so it's a very special library.
Because there is something special about remote islands in a biogeographical sense, isn't there?
Certainly, there's great biodiversity on islands, and I think European people somewhere in the early 1800s took on a fascination with islands, and wealthy people had collectors going around the world gathering plants and strange things to bring back to Europe. So in the Western mind, I think islands have a special place, yeah.
On our island, and we're nowhere near as remote as you, I think we've lost 14 species since Europeans stepped foot here. What have you lost?
So 9 land birds, that's the big tragedy. The early sailors that came here shot 2 for food. The early settlers, who were Englishmen from New Zealand, they started growing food crops here to sell to passing ships, and a little red-crowned parakeet like your kakari was here, and they shot that one because it was attacking their fruit. When the rats got here, 5 disappeared, and the government of New South Wales introduced masked owls to eat the rats, and the owls pushed out our little boobook owl. So 9 land birds have been lost. But very interestingly, in the last 40 years, the government and the community have worked to remove the feral pests. So we have no cats, no pigs, no goats, no rats, no mice. The introduced owls have been removed. And the land birds that we lost, they were subspecies of land birds that you can find on other islands around the Tasman Sea, like New Zealand, Australia, but particularly Norfolk Island. So I have done a paper, and a few people are looking at plans to maybe reintroduce some of those very similar subspecies back here. That would be a great achievement, maybe roll out over the next 10 years.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, same story here. In fact, we managed to transfer the last of our kokako before they would, the rats got them, and their offspring remain on Little Barrier Island. So potentially we could bring back not just the subspecies, but the descendants of something that's lost here. But, these grand visions, they take a lot of doing, don't they? So your journey from recognising the opportunities of making it happen was 14 years or something you mentioned?
From the time I went to a conference in Auckland in 2001, it was 2019 when the rodent eradication program took place. So yeah, so sort of 17, 18 years planning. So getting momentum, getting governments interested, getting plans, getting funding, and then getting resistance from a community and trying to overcome that.
Yeah, it would be interesting if you could paint a picture of what it was like in 2001, or just so we can get just a feel for the transformation. So what was it like to begin with, the community, the island?
Could I just drop back to 1980 when I first came?
Yes, even better. Yes.
Yeah. So in 1980, there were only 250 residents here. There was no television, there were no telephones, and the people that lived here were probably 95% descendants of families that had been here for 5 and 6 generations. So a very insular community, but also they had looked after their island and their fathers and grandfathers, and the community had a great sense of pride and ownership in their care of their island. And that was something that really impressed me when I came here. I'd never seen that in any other community on mainland Australia. So that's how it was. There was a very small tourist industry.
What brought you to the island?
So I was working at the Australian Met Office, and we had to move around every 2 years. So I thought, well, I had just finished a degree in botany, and I thought, well, I might leave the weather and become a botanist professional. And I thought, well, I'll just visit one of the far-flung weather stations before I do that. So I thought I'd come here for 2 years. I'm still here after 42 years.
Well, and keep going. So it was a small insular but proud community. Yeah.
Insular and proud community, very small 12-seater aeroplane servicing the island. All the accommodation was guest houses. People came and stayed and had all their meals, and it was a very carefree holiday experience. However, the reason that we had aeroplanes here was an airstrip was built in 1974. Prior to that, it was flying boats coming here. And when the airstrip went in, there was a lot of concern by conservationists about the impact of an airstrip and the increase in tourism. So a lot of environmental studies had been done on the island by people in plants and birds and insects, etc. And the New South Wales government premier used to holiday here. He was Neville Wran, and he quite loved the island. He saw it was very special. So he really pushed this World Heritage listing. The World Heritage system was only set up in 1975. So Neville Wran saw this as an opportunity to get another layer of protection at a Commonwealth government level, not just the state of New South Wales. So the World Heritage listing, all the documentation went through, and the management plan was drawn up to try and preserve the island. So that was officially declared in 1982, the World Heritage listing.
Right.
And that put a responsibility on the government to manage the environment and the affairs of the island better from a conservation point of view. So that was a big change, but it was for the good, of course. But with that change came, well, you do need qualified, experienced people, all the policies, the documents to do this. So there was a shift where in 1980, there was one mainland public servant living on the island, and gradually, as the World Heritage Program started to be necessary, more and more public servants from the mainland come over, and the island people felt a sense of loss of ownership and even their identity through this transfer of their caring for their island to government putting rules and regulations down on the community. So that was a major shift, and probably that's the roots of the resistance that did unfold over the next few decades as necessary conservation had to be put in place, but perhaps not with people who had the skills. They might have been very good biologists, conservationists, ornithologists, but they did not have the social skills to take the community on that journey with them.
Yeah, it would be
in
interesting
existence.
and to hear about that community journey, and maybe start now from when you went to that lecture or whatever that was, the meeting at Auckland University.
Sure. Well, in the mid-1990s, a chap called Rod Morris
Yeah.
from New Zealand came here. I believe he was New Zealand's David Attenborough, nature documentary person. And he told me about all the developments that were taking place around eradication of animals off the New Zealand islands. And that got me excited. Internet had sort of come in then, so I was able to follow a little bit what was going on over there. And I did hear about the Island Invasives Conference 2001 to be held in Auckland. And I did know the wife of the Assistant Director of World Wildlife Fund Australia. And I contacted him and asked if they would send somebody to that conference to make all the contacts to come and look at a possible rat eradication for Lord Howe Island. WWF came back to me and said, well, we'll sponsor you to go over. It's better. And I said, well, I'm just a freelance tour guide, researcher. So they also funded the Lord Howe Island Board CEO to go to that conference. So the two of us went over there and we saw all the great speakers, all the wonderful things happening in New Zealand and around the world. And we met key people like Alan Saunders. And the report that I gave to WWF and the Lord Howe Island Board from the conference, they approached Alan Saunders, and WWF funded a feasibility study to remove rats off Lord Howe Island. So that was carried out in 2002, and it did show that with all the experience developed in New Zealand islands, it would be possible to remove rats off this island. And that gave great encouragement to people on the island that were hardened conservationists and also the scientists in national parks of New South Wales. So that was a landmark thing. The feasibility study showed, yes, despite the rugged terrain with mountains 875 metres high, the New Zealanders had sort of been doing this and were confident it could be done.
So how have you done it? Poisons, trapping?
So it over all the years of planning and the input from the people from New Zealand, of course, and an international island invasive committee had input. And the basic method that the team came up with was to use aerial baiting over the majority of the island, which is 85% natural forest. The settlement's only in a very small central part of the island. And the plan there was to put out bait stations, plastic boxes about 30 centimetres square, locked so nobody could get in them, and the baits would go in there because couldn't drop poison pellets from a helicopter on roofs where people are collecting rainwater. And the New Zealanders, Grant Harper, that was in charge of the ground baiting, he said, well, if it's going to work, you need to put one bait station on the ground every 10 metres in the settlement because every rat and every mouse has to find a bait and eat it. And that added up to 19,500 bait stations. So the logistics of putting those out, it took 50 people one whole month to put them out, accurate with GPS. And they had to be checked and topped up each week for 3 months. So there's a huge amount of logistics and personnel involved. The poison pellets that were used were cereal. It's a formula made by, I think, Pest Off in New Zealand. And it's basically wheat or oats with brodifacoum, which is an anticoagulant. And I think a green colour dye is put in so that the fruit-eating birds don't want to eat them. They eat ripe fruit, which is red or orange. So these special pellets were developed, and that was the plan, to aerial distribute baits very carefully across the mountains with sophisticated GIS satellite flying routes, very controlled drop rates of pellets out of the helicopters that this had been fine-tuned over many island eradications around the world. So that's basically how it was carried out. Now, there were mice on the island as well as the rats, and every house probably had a few mice in the roof or the pantry or somewhere, the laundry. So there had to be mouse bait stations in each house, and that involved the cooperation of everybody to allow the bait stations to go in and to allow personnel to go in and check them and top them up.
So this is a good time to talk about community resistance, because
Yeah.
we're sure not everybody was super keen, particularly using bait.
That's right. Initially, when it was mooted, back in 2002, the feasibility study, people on the island busy about their business and their families and thought, oh, yeah, that's some pipe dream. That probably won't happen. Yeah. And as more interest came on, people were curious and, oh, yeah, that'd be good. They wouldn't be eating our vegetables. And we have a palm seeding industry, which is a big commercial industry. The rats were destroying all the palm seed or most of it. And it was costing about $100,000 a year to put out a warfarin bait in the settlement for human health reasons, and these warfarin baits in the palm forest to protect that commercial crop. So everybody could see the benefits and sort of went along. But the scientists that were involved in preparing the plan and potentially carrying it out, they were trained biologists, very good, in fairly senior positions in the departments, but they were trained biologists. They were not sociologists, and they had no understanding of a small community and the dynamics, particularly an island community where people have this 5 and 6 generation living and caring for the island. So as the biologists started to feel a bit of resistance, they didn't understand what the resistance was about. So they started feeding more facts to the community and saying, well, look, don't worry, trust us. Here's the medical report, says it's okay. Oh, the birds and the environment. No, here's another environmental report from an expert. So the community that have this knowledge of their island were being told, the experts know more than you, trust us. And that sort of set up a dynamic of resistance that got stronger and stronger, because the more the scientists started to push their view, the people were resisting, and the real problem was not being addressed. The real problem was we don't like authority telling us what to do when we really know a significant and deep understanding of our island, and you should really consult us because we can contribute. So that's where the resistance was. It was nothing to do with the poison. It was nothing to do with birds. It was this resistance and resentment of, or wariness of authority.
How did you break that deadlock?
Well, a small number of us on the island could really see what was happening, and we wrote a fairly strong letter to the Lord Howe Island Board pointing out that sort of fact. Get the biologists off. You've got to stop and try and engage social scientists, get the community on board. And out of the budget, in 2012, the budget was supposed to be $9.3 million for this, and they only had allowed $60,000 for community consultation. So the board that run the island, everything on the island, they were reluctant to engage a social scientist at a cost of $35,000. I believe if they had have taken that step then, it might have saved $5 million and perhaps 5 years. Earlier it could have happened, but it didn't. So it sort of got entrenched more and more, and the board and National Parks kept trying to tell the people it's all right and bringing more specialists over. And eventually it sort of came to a deadlock, and the international community, international panel of experts met to decide will we try and go ahead? Because if there's too much resistance and it fails, it may worldwide put the whole island eradication thing back if it fails. So they were very wary of it failing. And that international panel and Government of Australia panel more or less voted, well, we might just postpone it. But there was one man who was a Lord Howe Island board member, and he was on that panel. He knew the island. He'd grown up here. He's an old island family person, Barney Nichols. And he more or less said, no, we've got to go ahead. We've come this far. If we stop now, it'll never happen. And I want to see it through. So because he voted, no, we have to proceed, then the international panel kept pushing with the planning. And the board decided to have a sort of community referendum on this, and a vote went out to people with a few questions about should it proceed, should it not proceed. And the vote was the same as Brexit. I think 52% said yes, cautiously proceed to the next stop, which is making a more detailed plan, having that verified. So it wasn't saying go ahead, it was saying proceed to the next step. If those next steps show it is all safe, then we'll go to the final step of proceeding. So that was a very small margin of the community for and against, but it did proceed, and the board and some residents, just tried to get information quietly to people that were maybe sitting on the fence.
They had spent the $35,000 on a social scientist and saved $5 million in a lot of time. In pragmatic terms, what would you imagine that social scientist would have done? How would that have manifested?
Well, I did know the chap and introduced him. He was from Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, running a big social scientist team of 30 scientists. He was going to put 2 PhD students or postdocs on it, a couple of supervisors, even international supervisors, and engage the community initially, coming over and just asking people, what do you think? Trying to step back a bit and saying, well, is the rat problem real, and is it something we would like to look at, and how would you as a community like to do it? And sort of try and step back there and get the community to have big input, so at least they felt they were part of the program.
Conversation.
Yeah, conversation. And a key thing that came out of this, as these sort of environmental things have evolved in Australia and more so in New Zealand, it's realised that a key word is collaboration. And collaboration is, okay, initially get everybody to recognise, do we or do we not have a problem? And it's something we have to work out, talk about. And once we've recognised it, how can we as community, scientists, whoever, move forward and just get everybody to have ownership all the way through in every journey. The traditional method of this sort of process is something called consultation, where the experts come in, they do a study, do a paper, maybe do a little presentation and a questionnaire, and people have got 2 months to comment, and then we'll do it. So it's more or less rubber stamp, whereas the collaboration from the very beginning, you have to foster ownership by the community of the program.
So now Lord Howe Island is pest-free, so no rats. We know that one turned up in 2021 and was quickly stamped on, but no rats, no mice, right? Bring it to life for us. So tell us about the impact on the island. So as a result?
It's a renaissance. It's 5 years now since there were no rats here, and we have a flightless rail called the woodhen, and your weka is a close relative. And for 30 years, the woodhen numbers in an annual survey had been about the 200. After the program, when the woodhens, this was part of the rat eradication, the woodhens had to be kept in pens, 230 woodhens, all the woodhens. They were released after the program, and within 6 months, they doubled in number. They went from 200 to 440. And now we have over 2,000 of these wood hens. So that's a tenfold increase. And all of our land birds have increased. And that's because one rat was eating 15 grams of food every night, and we had 120,000 rats. So if you do some maths, now all that food is there for birds to eat. And the wood hens, not only increasing in number, but they're bigger and fatter. And they're being seen in places where nobody alive saw them.
How do the community feel about it then? So you've been 5 years pest-free. What's the feeling in the community?
The people that were pro-eradication just over the moon with excitement. It's just every day I go out in the forest, it's not only the birds, you see little seedlings growing up into trees, forests of seedlings where for 100 years it was bare ground because the rats and mice would eat seeds or seedlings. So the forest is responding. There's a number of beetles that were thought to be extinct, quite large beetles. They were thought to be extinct. They hadn't been seen for 100 years, but without the rats, they just existed there in low numbers, and without the rats, they're increasing and being seen. So there's all this wonderful stuff happening. As I said, the people that were really pro the eradication are jumping with joy. The community generally is quietly happy, and the people that were dissenting all the way through, they've just gone quiet, and we don't want to stir up and say, see, we told you it was going to be good. We just let everybody accept the island. And the changes that we're going to see have only just started for this 5 years. Over the next 10, 20 years, there's going to be more and more changes, and the island ecosystems have benefited. And of course, we're a tourist island, relying heavily now on our World Heritage and natural history, natural values. So it is going to be more of a draw card. As word gets out about this program, people will come just to see what has been achieved.
I want to ask about that, Ian, because it sounds so wonderful. You can kind of imagine everyone wants to come and look at things, but you in a way, you've already solved that problem because of your history, haven't you? You've the people that can come are very high value tourists. Tell us about how that has manifested itself.
Because the island is isolated, access here is very expensive. In the flying boat days, it was expensive. And even now, we have Qantas fly a 32-seat -8 here. And in summer, the airfare can be $1,800 return from Sydney. And you can fly to Los Angeles and back, or London and back for that fare. So it is sort of limiting who can come here. It's people that are fairly affluent or people that really want to come. We get average working people that might save up for 2 or 3 years, not having a holiday, but so they can come here. But we're not worried about over-tourism, which is happening around the world, because in 1980, the Lord Howe Island Board wisely put a cap of 400 tourist beds on the island. So there are licensed accommodation places, and there are only 400 tourist beds. So during the peak Christmas and Easter period, about 400 tourists here, and we have about 400 local residents. That's quite a good mix where you don't have too many tourists coming really, spoiling the place or just crowding. So that has made the island quite a unique destination. There are not many places in the world where there is a cap. And at peak time, you can come here and in the morning find no footprints on the beach. You can find a little cove to have a swim where there's no one. You can go out on a walking track and maybe not see anybody that day.
Dean, I mean, again, was there community resistance to capping tourist numbers?
Not at all. Back in 1980, there were probably 340 or 350 tourist beds licensed, and everybody had a job for what they needed. People had a simple life, no television to buy. People didn't worry. A lot of people didn't have a car. They used push bikes or motor scooters. So at the time, it was okay. And even as that number was taken up to the full 400, people were very happy, because they see their island way of life as very special and they want to preserve that. They don't want to have to go to a shop and stand in a queue with for people. They just want to turn up and buy what they want. They want to be able to go down the beach and not have crowds. So the island people are very happy with that cap of 400.
I guess that those tourists are high value tourists as well. So they're not, you're not getting the backpackers, you're getting the high value tourists who are going to spend. They can afford to get there.
Yes, they afford to get here, and then the high value people will maybe appreciate the value of going on a guided tour. So it's quite a the island industry is mainly tourism. Second now would be conservation. A lot of people, local people, are employed in the conservation programs, but people that come here, educated, fairly well off, they see the value in going on a guided walk or a guided snorkel tour and learning off a local about what they're looking at. You can go walking here by yourself, good network of safe tracks. There's lots of beach snorkeling, but there are these tour operators who offer a high level of what we guess call interpretation, where the local tour guide can explain the ecosystem and what's being looked at.
So the people getting the jobs as the tour guides are locals. And is there, a reciprocal appreciation of the Lord Howe way, the culture of the original, the inhabitants? Is there a cultural element to the dynamic between the visitors and the locals?
There is, and I think one of the key things that people enjoy about a visit to Lord Howe Island is the authenticity of the island. The people that are tour guides, they could be 4, 5, 6 generation people. When they're doing the walk, they can tell stories, and that's a key part with tourism. People love to have things explained in stories. So a guy can talk about his father or grandfather when they used to go seeding in remote mountain areas, or they used to go pig shooting. So there is that cultural element through the community. And of course, at the museum here, we do have a very large human history story, which we've just revamped in the last 2 years, celebrating the connection of families with the land. We do that through the stories in the museum.
Wonderful. Do you have complementary industries like farming still, or you mentioned the palm kernel, was it? But so there are other elements of your economy as well as the conservation tourism sector.
That's right. The palm industry has been very big since 1860. The palm that grows here is the Kentia palm. And since the 1860s, that's been the world's most popular palm to grow indoors. So once the food provisioning business for the whaling ship stopped about 1860, the palm industry was there, and this great affluence where 3 million palm seeds were shipped to Europe every year to grow as new indoor plants. That was a big industry probably until about 2005 or 10, when internationally other entrepreneurs on islands put palm plantations in. So Norfolk Island, Canary Islands, parts of Florida and Australia. There's more palm seed now, so the palm seeding industry here has diminished. I think they export 500,000 palm seedlings. They germinate the seeds into small seedlings. So it was 3 million in the 1980s and 90s. It's down to about 500,000. So it's still an element here, and tourists still come to love and look at that industry and hear about the stories. And of course, all through the forest, the Kentia palms growing. So there is that. And you did mention a few other industries. We have a very small fishing industry in that local people and the tourists need to eat, and a number of very small boats. And we're talking here like 8, 10-metre boats, maybe just 1 or 2 people on the boats, but there's no export of fish. All the fish that's caught is just to consume on the island. So that is an employment for some people. And the same with food crops. When the island had a boat servicing only every 6 weeks, a lot of the food was grown on the island. Once we had a fortnightly ship coming about 1982, then the crop growing dropped off. But in the last 10 years, 15, there's been a resurgence in growing local food. One is that visitors coming to a destination do like to eat something local. So that's an incentive. And also the cost of shipping here is very expensive. So people growing food just for their own needs. So we have now got quite a few people growing on their plot of land. Some simple things like bananas, avocados, citrus, tomatoes, some of those things that are fairly easy to grow, pumpkins, rock melons. And the people that have the lease on the palm nursery now, they imported 2 large glass houses from Europe, and they're growing in glass houses all year round, tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplants, those sort of food items for the island. So the food thing is becoming a bit more of a growing industry.
Right. What about your kind of travel infrastructure, like the airlines, the ferries, and any other infrastructure? Has the community been able to have an ownership stake in any of that?
For about 20 or 30 years, the island people did own our trading ship. A few people got together, invested the money and purchased one, and they ran the business. But as those people got over retirement age, they just wanted to divest. So it is a company from New South Wales now own the ship. So that's owned by a company. And then Qantas fly out of here from Sydney, but we have another small airlines operate from Port Macquarie. They come in 2 or 4 times a week, different seasons, from Port Macquarie in 12-seater King Air aircraft. So the island people have jobs employed at the airport for those services, but they don't have a economic stake in those at all, no.
It almost sounds like it's as good as it's ever been.
Yeah.
I mean, have you made it, or what? Where, I'm sure there's always challenges. What are you facing now? Or are there any kind of shadow sides to the story?
Couple of shadow sides. One is the transport. Our ship will retire in 5 years, so we won't have a trading ship. But the government of New South Wales have committed to designing and having built a new ship, which will be built to the highest biosecurity standards. So this is to make sure that no rats, frogs, snakes, mice, insects get onto the island. So that's a great thing. And to go with that, the government have announced they will upgrade some sort of jetty pier port facility to handle that new ship. So that's promising that our goods and services will still come in a more secure way. Qantas have a contract for 5 years to provide an air service. The government of Australia, with some very remote locations, do give sole operating rights to companies. So I think every 5 years, the government say, well, who wants to operate a service to Lord Howe Island? Any air company in Australia can say, well, I will, and this is the conditions, and that company gets sole rights, which is probably why the airfares are a bit expensive. So looming ahead is what is going to happen when those small Dash 8s do reach their end of frame life. Will Qantas get another aircraft? Will Qantas drop out and somebody else? So that's something that's looming, is access to the island.
Do you have a tourism levy to help fund, the services that tourists need and locals also use?
We do. So the Lord Howe Island Board, like the local council, they have to have their own budget and fund their programs and operations and staff. And there is what's called an environmental levy, and I believe it's $38 each way in an air ticket. So every passenger, whether it's a tourist or whether it's me when I go to Sydney and back, we're paying that tourist environmental levy, and that does help fund the maintenance of the walking tracks. It funds staff of rangers and people that have to maintain the island. And there are, barbecue facilities and things like that, and the weeding programs come out of that environmental money.
Such an inspiring ecotourism story, Ian.
Well, I did come in 1980, and I had finished my botany degree, and I was a bit interested in the environment, of course. And about 1984 or 5, I started doing some tours in my holidays. I'd bring groups of interested people for a week holiday. A lot of these people were very environmentally aware, and they would notice the weeds and sort of talk about what can be done. So I started to include a half a day volunteer weeding on these general nature weeks, and that got a lot of take up. And in about 1994, a group of 8 people said, look, we'd love to come back and do more. Could we come back if you organise a tour and we'll weed half the time? So I did that in 1995 with 8 people. That was a great hit. It got a bit of publicity. And in 1998, with a chap from Sydney who met me here doing what I was doing, we brought another group of 26 people, and we made such a massive impact with 26 people for 6 mornings a week that it got a lot of enthusiasm. And well, since 1995, there's been 97 of these weeding weeks and over 30,000 volunteer hours contributed. And that put a big focus on the weeds. The community thought it was a bit strange. They scratched their heads and sort of laughed, what are these mad people doing? But when they started coming back year after year, the local people stood up and said, wow, we must have a problem. So it opened that awareness and also prompted the administration board, who at the time were primarily focused on the built environment, the roads and that sort of infrastructure. And gradually the environmental team has built up. So it not only removed some weeds, created awareness, and I think the secret to the weeding trips, or there are many, but sort of a few things going on. One is it is a very beautiful island, and it's got the World Heritage status, and people that come here for any reason can't be not impressed by the landscape and the flora, the fauna. And for people to come along on a holiday and be able to contribute something to maintaining that environmental integrity, they get a lot of satisfaction. So much so that we have got some of our weeders have been 23, 24 times. They love coming back every year to see the progress of how their programs are going, but also how all the government and Lord Howe Island Board programs like the goat eradication, the rat eradication, just to see how all that's going on. And the program is just the mornings weeding, and then in the afternoons I take people on guided walks. So we'll go out for a walk looking at all the flora. Another time we might go and look at the birds, geology, the marine life, great marine life around our rock platforms. So it's sort of an eco tour package with the contribution of conservation, learning and experiencing the island. Of an evening, we all have great dinners together and chat and talk about where people travel and what they've done in conservation. So it's a great program. And we did in 2002 form a group, the Friends of Lord Howe Island, to formally make this a organisation that would go ahead. I'm still here, fortunate to be involved with it, but maybe when I get to 100 weeding eco tours, I might hand it to somebody else. And also being a community group, we can apply for government grants and get sponsorship donations that are tax deductible. So the Friends of Lord Howe Island have been able to sponsor other projects on the island by paying local people to do certain conservation projects. So that's the success of it.
Yes. What were you going to say, Tim?
So a lot of the things that have been transformational on the island, like getting rid of the pests or some of these other initiatives, have largely been government funded, or have there been opportunity for other forms of investment in, the big ticket investments that were needed to change the game and get to the better place you are now? Is it?
I think we have to acknowledge the local community. The local community, for example, the ones that got rid of the pigs, and in all of the programs, whether it's removing the goats or the rat eradication, a lot of the local people were employed on those as well, and were motivated to see that happen. So there is the local community. Private sponsorship's been a bit tricky on Lord Howe Island, because the way that I vaguely understand the Lord Howe Island Board and the government of New South Wales, if somebody donates money, it goes into New South Wales Treasury and they'll decide what to do with it. And they might give some back to Lord Howe Island, but there might be 30% taken for administration. I don't really understand how it works, but that is why there hasn't been a real conservation trust fund set up for these projects on Lord Howe Island. However, the Friends of Lord Howe Island are looking into this, and we may be trying to expand the scope so that in our constitution, it's not just to remove weeds, but it's to promote and carry out any sort of conservation. And we may be able to attract big ticket sponsor people for programs. We still have a few environmental things to do. We have an introduced frog here that we want to try and get rid of. And it may be we can find a private sponsor to put that up. We have found a private sponsor to carry out a documentary about Lord Howe Island, and that will be filmed in October this year and February next year. And the thrust of this documentary is to highlight all the great benefits that have happened in the last 40 years of removing pigs, cats, rats, mice, and everything, and show the community involvement in that. And this will be screened internationally, be a 1-hour documentary.
Yeah, I want to hone in back into that pest-free. Did you start with rats and mice? Because I want to talk about pigs, goats. What was the other one? And cats, and feral cats particularly, right? So did you do them all at the same time, or do you?
No, the very first invasives eradication was cats and pigs, and this was to save our woodhen, the flightless bird. Back in the 1970s, scientists from the Australian Museum took an interest, and they realised there may have only been 20 or 30 surviving, and half may have been infertile. So there was concern the woodhen was facing extinction, and that drove the program to remove the predators. At the time, it was mainly cats and pigs, and dogs controlled. And that was sort of privately funded because the National Parks Foundation of New South Wales had been just set up to fund conservation, and they raised $250,000 as a door-knock appeal in Sydney, which was a lot of money in 1980. So the impetus for removing the first feral animals was to ensure the survival of the woodhen.
I ask you, removing cats, what happened to the rat and mice population?
Probably the rat numbers increased a little bit in the settlement because cats might have been eating them in the settlement, but we have a few 100,000 seabirds breed here each year, and they were much easier food for a cat than chasing a rat up a tree. So I don't think removal of the cats had a big impact on the rat population because there's so much natural food out there.
Right.
So Lord Howe Island had evolved without mammals, except for a little insect-eating bat. So there was all this food of insects, berries, seedlings, just sitting there, and the rats, that was their food.
And no community pushback on pigs, because we have an interesting thing with pigs on this island. Some people see them as an important food source and sport, and others just see them as a pest. So was there kind of community agreement that pigs were a pest?
There was, yes. Wow. So pigs had been put here about the year 1800 by sailors, put them here, and the goats for food. And then the island people had farms and domestic pigs, but the wild ones roamed through the mountains. And up until about the 1970s, it was the weekend sport for the island men to go pig shooting. There was no television. They couldn't sit and watch the footy final, so they'd be out pig shooting. So the island men quite enjoyed that. But they did see the damage that the pigs were doing, because in the forest they root up all the vegetation, and everybody wanted their wood hen saved. So there was no resistance to removing the pigs. Some people reminisce and say, oh, I really used to enjoy it, but okay, for the good of the island and to save the wood hen. Yeah. And the island men mainly shot the pigs.
Yeah, interesting. We've only got 5 minutes. Anything you want to ask before we wrap up, Tim?
Oh, you've got no marsupials.
No, we've just got the insect-eating bat. It's called the large forest bat. It's a little guy. That's the only mammal that's native to this island.
Interesting.
Gosh, I found this so inspiring, and I just wanted, I guess, thinking out loud with friends of Lord Howe Island, how wonderful that you've reframed, tourists and visitors as contributors to the island as well. You've brought them into the Lord Howe stories. I think with a lot of islands, and even this one, there tends to be like, there's us who live here and you want to come and we need your money. But it's a very interesting reframing there.
And a very important thing with the Friends of Lord Howe Island weeding trips, we run them in the winter months, which are the off-season. So that's easier to work when it's not hot, but also it boosts the tourist economy.
Yes.
And it's not only benefiting the environment, removing weeds, but it's providing money to the airline, to the lodges, to the shops, the restaurants, and the island people really do embrace the Friends of Lord Howe Island. These people that have been 24 times, all the shop owners know them, say, oh, good day, how you been? And that sort of thing. And we have 2 gay weeders in our Friends of Lord Howe Island, and they're so attached to it, they actually got married on a weeding trip here at Lord Howe Island.
What's going on here?
Yeah. Hey, just another just a contextual question. How long does it take to fly to your island? Because you're a lot more remote than us.
Yeah, it's 700 kilometres from Sydney, and that's about a 1 hour 50 flight in the Dash 8. And it's about 1.5 hours from Port Macquarie. Yeah.
You sold me. I want to come.
Yeah. And what about on a boat? Are you coming every 2 weeks, did you say?
A ship comes every 2 weeks with food, building material, cars, fuel, everything.
How long does that trip take?
About 40 hours. Now, I should just add one thing, thinking about your island, and the question of if we had got the social scientists involved in 2013, one thing they would have done would have been to get a group of island people, mix some for the rat eradication, some on the fence, some maybe against it, and pay for them to visit an island in New Zealand where an eradication's taken place, and get those island people to go and discover and find out and bring their findings back to their community. So I would recommend any of your people that are looking at conservation, not just eradications, a trip to Lord Howe Island would be quite worthwhile, because if people come here and see what can be done, they'll get inspired to do something.
Wow.
Wow.
Job for us.
I'll be there. I'll be there. Hey,
Find an entrepreneur sponsor who would do that for you.
gosh, Ian, we need to talk. Look, we're out of time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ian. We've absolutely loved your story. I think, it's inspiring. There's a lot of snaps with where we're at, and we'll give it a spin in the community and
absolutely
see what we can.
And I should say we're all inspired here from New Zealand. All of our conservation initiatives have got the New Zealand expertise and experience. The guy that saved the wood hen breeding, he bred wood hens, he was a New Zealander. It was the New Zealanders that got rid of the goats. They was their planning and personnel that got rid of rats and mice. So you've got all the expertise there. It's just a matter of the social scientists and get communities to invite all these specialists to come and carry out good things.
How inspiring. Look, and we're going to be getting your address to send you something.
All right.
Of our very special precious island gin distilled by Andy Ross, who hails from Melbourne actually, but she has a home here on the island and distills this, I should say, off-grid, recycled glass. It's award-winning. You'll love it. Pohutakawa honey is one of the keynotes in there, and that gin t-shirt. And somehow it'll take maybe a few weeks, but it'll get there. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, and good luck with all your adventures and endeavours over there.
I'll pop in the envelope a copy of my book, Island Notes,
good idea,
Ian, because I was also inspired by Rod Morris, so a bit of my backstory will connect with yours.
Is that the story Nights, Island Nights?
Yeah, it's a book I wrote.
Island Notes.
So I'm going to,
okay.
Oh, thank you so much. I found this so inspiring.
All right, thank you, and we hope to meet you sometime.
Indeed. Okay, have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So, he's given it the overnight test.
2 overnights, actually, but
2 overnights, and you had a big dream about it. So, what do you reckon?
well, I found it fascinating. I was actually really inspired by it. I thought, yeah, it was such a clear story too, wasn't it, of a hesitant community that ended up really getting behind a transformative idea, and the benefits are so tangible to them now.
Amazing. Totally. I got a lot from that. I thought he was incredibly inspiring. Boy, where do I start? And if I encapsulated that, because it was similar to the conversation with Søren from Sur Island in Denmark, a visionary leader from the community.
Yeah, with a lot of credibility amongst the locals. Yeah.
Yes, but not afraid of conflict and pushback, and seeing that as just part of a process of a process of being in a community, and also accepting and leaning into that discomfort where all voices must be heard. Again, he talked about collaboration and consultation, but not in the city version of consultation, right? But probably literally real conversations. And he said that was the biggest learning, like, in the notes too, I read that was the biggest learning in terms of slowing down that consultation period. And even the words consultation, it sounds so corporate, but I think it's having conversations with the community.
Yeah, because at the beginning it was perceived as something being imposed on them. And I think that's the same on this island. People are really resistant to the idea of government coming in and, the creep of government controlling things. But it changed, I think, for them when they were given the opportunity to say, well, what's the problem here?
Yes.
And everyone accepted there was a problem because, rats were so obviously taking, their crops, their palm crops, preventing the establishment of, wildlife. They feared the loss of the wood hen. So when they were given the opportunity to wrestle with the problem and then the dilemma of dealing with the problem, they felt empowered to make the decision.
Yeah, and look, it's not, you never can please all of the people all of the time, right? And so I really got that. But the other thing that I found really inspiring was the Friends of Lord Howe Island, that reframing, that people coming into the island, it wasn't necessarily us and them, accepting and actually realizing that if their island was spectacular enough, and that visitors would feel that heart, and they would feel the glory of the island, and also want to respect that, and inviting them in to participate in the conservation project, weeding holidays. I thought that was fascinating. I mean, because you'd have to call it weeding holidays, not weed holidays on Great Barrier, but that would be, I thought that was so inspiring, and that culminated in an offshore, off-island friends group that could contribute. That was amazing.
Yeah. Well, so for me, like, it's the power of a big idea. I mean, like the opportunity to participate in a restoration
Yes.
project of that importance has such pulling power. People want to be part of it.
Yeah.
And and that's what catalyzed, weeding holidays. I mean, I loved the local fishing and the local gardening too. So I think a lot of us feel that would be nice here if we were able to use the resources we have to manakitanga our visitors. And that's exactly what Lord Howe was able to do. They geared those primary sectors to, feeding the visitors. So it grows the economy in several different ways, just the restoration exercise.
I just also, and maybe the way they do it on Lord Howe is more official than what I'm imagining, but also local tour guides, right? I just know so many visitors land here and think everything's shut, right? Everything's shut. People aren't particularly friendly or whatever. And then, because I think there's sometimes an indifference to people coming onto Aotea. But I was thinking, oh, actually, that's a really great idea. If there was a group of people who were just happy to give half a day of their time, they can get paid for it, to be a local tour guide. I do that for our visitors, right? Yeah. I always say things like, okay, we're going to do the arts and crafts tour today, and we'll go to Peter's gallery, we'll go to Sarah's, we'll go to the Claris gallery, etc. But you do that as a matter of course. But I'm thinking, what if you didn't know anybody here?
Well, I wrote down here, local fishers and local gardeners providing high produce to high value visitors who are paying a levy to be guided by locals to hear local stories. How good is that?
What's not to love?
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. I also think there's not many big transformative ideas out there for islands in the restoration space. The big ideas tend to be imposed often as exploitive exercises, like That's Mine Te Mata, that came up 10 years ago or so with the last national government. Fortunately, Nikki Kay helped put a stop to it. But, this is a call to action about rejuvenation, bringing back abundance. And a little bit like the wind farms on the Danish island. It's a really positive thing.
Yeah.
That's what's exciting to me, because it's big, but it's positive as well.
Boy, I'd love to visit. I mean, I'm really inspired to visit Lord Howe. I think it sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting that they were inspired by the New Zealand story of, island eradications of rats, and then do it there, and yet we're resistant to it here. Maybe we have to go there and see how successful it's been to kind of.
I don't know if the resistance here is necessarily rat eradication. It's probably the methods of doing rat eradication. But anyway, that's all part of a.
Well, I think it's probably bigger than that, Sandy, in the sense that I think, people are reacting about the method, but it's actually the imposition of government. That's the triggering thing. As Ian said, the science will tell you that it's actually, benign in the bigger picture, but that for most people it's a fear, and it's rooted in a history of distrust of what governments intend, and that's why you have to take it back to real conversations amongst real people, defining the real problem, and then weighing up the, nothing, it's not a simple decision, but you have, not making a decision. What's that when they say that? It's, you're what is that term when you don't make a decision? You are in a way, aren't you? You're just choosing the status quo.
That's right. It's a passive resistance. I think that, but overall, they had a big vision. They had a big idea, right? There was a big idea. Not everybody agreed with it, but a visionary leader, started with a big idea. But anyway, this is exciting. It's getting more interesting as we go.
Yeah, well, I look forward to hearing who's next.
Small Island Big Ideas wish to thank our sponsor, Island Gin, probably the world's most sustainable gin company, distilled with Manuka bush honey and bottled in recycled glass right here off-grid on Aotea Great Barrier Island.
And thanks to our partner in crime, Bree Biederman, researcher Emma Ricketts, Aotea FM, Luke Nola and friends, and the local board of Aotea Great Barrier Island's Auckland Council, and the Festival of Adult Learning.
Is there anybody else we need to thank?
Oh, probably half the island, Sandy, but...
and Georgie, let's give a shout out
my
to
daughter Georgie.
Yeah.
The crew at Aotea FM, Linda Rowe and Renee Freeland.
Oh, and everybody from the island who's given us the great ideas too.
Yeah, that's right. They keep coming, don't they?
Absolutely.